But because it was genuinely unique, you know, unlike the Galaxy, or unlike my Galaxy S, which I considered was just a complete knockoff of the iPhone, you know, Microsoft brought something fresh to the table, and it fascinated me. I was a huge fan of the emphasis that was placed on typography, and how the interface was primarily comprised of, you know, content. And, you know, unlike the other OSs, it didn't try to mimic something that it wasn't. And so you didn't find any gradients or drop shadows or brushed metal or wood grain. You know, none of this was in sight. And there was also these, you know, beautiful, fluid, very meaningful animations that would bring the OS to life when you would interact with it. And it just felt very responsive, very snappy, and it was fast. It felt faster than everything else. The one thing, though, that really sold me was the emphasis that was placed on gestures. And so there was this introduction of the panorama control and the pivot control, which just, you know, had content bleeding off the edge and enticing you to swipe across to get more information. Now, to me, this felt like the perfect way that we should be interacting with a glass flat surface. And, you know, you contrast this to the constant button prodding and page drilling that we need to do to navigate iOS or Android. And, you know, this is another thing that sort of opened up my eyes a little. And what I realized at this point was, you know, Microsoft were going on a very new and interesting direction. You know, they delivered real innovation to the smartphone experience, and it's something that hadn't been done since the first generation iPhone, in my personal opinion. I mean, not even Apple themselves. I mean, we look at iOS 6 today, and it's very similar to previous iterations. And so Mike and I, we believe that Microsoft were onto something, and we really just wanted to be a part of it. For those who are familiar with our apps and the apps of our competitors, will know that we actually usually have a smaller feature set. And we still, however, manage to hold higher rank. And we found that most people choose experience over functionality. And so, of course, I mean, this is all within reason. You have to fulfill a certain level of functionality, but the more effort that you put into design, the better chance that you're going to have to compete. So rather than trying to match our competitors' feature set, we focus on delivering the better experience. And, you know, as I explained in our initial goals, we've had this motto from the very beginning. And just an example to showcase this is a 2.0 update that we pushed out. Now, 2.0, it saw the inclusion of a custom video player, which no longer piggybacked off IE, and so we had a full-blown player within our app. And we also implemented YouTube's like and dislike feature. Now, both of these were major features on their own. We could have pushed these features out without thinking too much, and it would have been a big update. But I ended up actually putting a lot of thought into the design of the rating toggle itself. And so I was trying, if you look from the sketches, I was thinking about how do I best mimic the action of thumbs up and thumbs down, and I was just trying to give people a unique kind of experience. And the playback player as well, we actually got it to play inside thumbnail view. So here you can see in the little video is actually playing, and to get it to full screen you just have to rotate your phone. And the thing is, this, you know, Mike's had a whole heap of trouble with performance to try and actually technically to get this to work. But we stuck at it and we made it work. So what I'm saying is we put most of our effort into innovating on the actual experience rather than trying to deliver a particular feature set. And I think this is probably one of the biggest things that's really helped us stand out from the crowd. The next major milestone for us came with the announcement of Windows Phone Mango. Joe Belfiore did what he does best, and he jumped up on stage and he got us very, very excited about this new update. And so we thought that we'd take advantage of it and time a major release of our app with the new OS. The thing is, our app was pretty much feature complete, and I knew that to justify a rollover of a 3.0 version number, we needed to redesign the app. It was the only way that it was really going to work. And so that's what I set out to do. And the single best resource for me came in the form of a design template that Microsoft had just released. And it had both Photoshop and Expression Blend files. And, you know, this template has pretty much everything you need to construct a Windows Phone app. And it really helped me rethink how I was going to structure the UI. The most influential part of this template was this really nice panorama. And the second I saw it, I just immediately wanted to start playing around with it and playing with different ideas. The good thing about the The good thing about the panorama was it allowed me to actually I didn't have to change a lot of the underlying design. So I'd bubble up information to the panorama. Once the user drilled down, it was the app that they had already known and the app that they were already very familiar with. And so they went from the panorama to the pivot control, and it was this kind of win-win. And sticking with the desire to innovate and pay attention to the finer details, I made some drastic changes to this to the playback UI, the playback controls. I drew a bit of inspiration from the OS dial pad, and I set up these really big buttons and I put them in this kind of interesting layout. And I thought, that was pretty cool at the time. And I was quite happy with the direction that the UI was going, and I felt between the new panorama and the player control, we had enough to justify this 3.0 launch that I've been talking about. Coming back to the importance of customer support, Mike received an email from a guy called Ron Manlapaz, and he was having some issues subscribing to an author or something like that. And it turns out that Ron was a senior UX designer on the Windows Phone design team. And Mike very cleverly asked if Ron would be interested in giving us a bit of feedback on our latest designs. And sure enough, Ron being the cool cat that he is, he was more than happy, and we started this exchange. Not only did he come back with amazing feedback, but he actually CC'd his manager, Brian Agnetta, into the conversation. And so here I was, getting feedback from literally the best in the business. And I had to pinch myself a few times, and it was awesome. And here's some of the conversations that we had. My beloved video player got ripped to shreds. The gradients and the bevels that I'd used in the slider controls, they broke the Metro design language. And by doing this, I was giving visual priority to controls that weren't, the sliders weren't more important than play and pause. But if you look, the first things that pop out at you on that screen are those two sliders because of the way that I was using this gradients and trying to make it look real as opposed to Metro. Ron also felt that the UI was a big risk. I'd aligned the primary playback controls on the left, and this is fantastic if you're actually holding the phone with your left hand, but what happens when you hold it with your right? And so the UI completely broke down in that case. Next was the volume slider itself. And we'd had a custom volume slider inside our app for a very long time, and it was actually a big hit with our users. And so you can imagine I was quite surprised when Brian told me that he'd like to see it completely canned. And what followed was a very interesting conversation. On one hand, we actually had proof that this feature was something our users wanted. People found their hardware buttons tedious sometimes, and some people would watch YouTube before going to bed, and they'd have it on low volume, but they'd forget to put it back on a high volume, and so their alarms would wake them up in the morning. And the thing is, this UI slider helped them get around that. And so, I was a little confused. Why does he want us to remove it? And the thing is, this issue falls under Microsoft's Win as One design principle. And basically, by us providing a control that isn't found anywhere else in the system, we're kind of backstabbing everyone and priming our user for a bad overall experience. And so to further elaborate, despite the fact that our users are going to be happy with their YouTube experience, what happens when they go into their media player or another music app that's actually adhering to this principle? They're going to get a taste of what our experience is like, and it might actually be better, but when they jump into these other apps, they're going to be left wanting, and so overall, the experience is bad. And it's a tough concept, and there's a lot of exceptions here, but the point is we should try and work within the system constraints and give users a consistent overall experience. So here's the design I actually ended up settling on. As you can see, there's no more gradients, there's no more bevels, no volume slider, and the primary control is placed correctly in the middle where it's accessible from everywhere, and it's the largest visual on the screen. And so we were still able to deliver a custom player which has the extra features that are vital to the YouTube experience, but it didn't stray too far from what you'd expect to see throughout the OS. And the next major issue was my rating slider, so another control that I was so proud of. The problem was I broke some major fundamentals, and it suffered from the same gradient and bevel issues that we discussed, but more importantly, I placed a vertically sliding control inside a page that actually vertically scrolled. And so the action of rating and scrolling were competing for the same gesture, and it's something that should always be avoided in our apps. Another example of this is in my settings screens, and so you notice the tile notifications slider toggle. it's very easy for somebody wanting to turn off tile notifications via a slide gesture to actually miss that slide control and navigate to the next section, or vice versa. And so this is the kind of things that we should. And a better control in this case would have been a toggle button or a checkbox. So this is how the design ended up. I replaced the rating slider with 2 simple toggle buttons, and by removing the slider, I was also able to double the size of the preview player, which ended up making a much nicer experience. So my overzealous desire to innovate without actually considering the fundamentals is kind of what got me into hot water. So I was on the right track, but not quite. And Brian later came back with some really good points about the panorama. And he suggested that the panorama is not about efficiency. And so, you know, the pivot control is where you want to be efficient. The panorama is quite the opposite. It should be just like a magazine cover. And so you should tease the user to explore and just nibble on bits of information. It should act as, you know, just a suggestive entry point into the different parts of your app. And it should be just like, you know, the tip of the iceberg. So I was treating the panorama just like a pivot. I had way too much information, and you know, the UI just felt cramped. And Brian suggested that I strip it back and let it breathe. So here's the after. And what I did is I merged the most viewed and featured into a single double spanning section, and I reduced heavily how many videos were displayed. I completely canned the category visuals, and so now the categories became just a simple text list. And each section of the panorama I laid out differently, and I alternated from a high visual to a low visual, back to a high visual, so you can see it goes from pictures to text to pictures to text. And this kind of just eases the user through the browsing experience. And the key thing with panoramas is you should make very clear suggestions and not try to do too much with it. Brian also pinged me on the fact that I was making up font sizes as I went on, and I didn't correctly align to the design grid. And so we had to go through all our templates again and see what the correct sizes were and realign everything. And this was very, very tedious, but the end result meant that the app looked a lot more native to the OS. And had I actually done this from the very beginning, I wouldn't have had any issues at all. And finally, Brian wanted me to redesign my UI, my login UI, to mimic the system default. Now, there wasn't anything particularly wrong with my initial design, but he wanted to highlight this idea of having a consistent overall experience. And we took this on board, and every custom control from there that we actually built, we managed to, or we tried to mimic something that was already on the OS. And this is another thing that, you know, doing these things, Windows Phone and Metro Design in general is not about reinventing the wheel. It's all about a consistent, unified experience throughout the whole OS. So with the 3.0 nearly out of beta, my attention shifted from the app experience to getting the app ready for launch. And up until this point, you know, our apps were heavily tied to our company brand. And as I suggested earlier, you know, our primary goal was to make a name for ourselves and, you know, get as much exposure as possible. And the thing is, you know, our branding was very much hit and miss. I think half of the room probably says, "Oh, that's kind of cool," and half of the room says, "What, you guys are crazy? What the hell? You got a worm on a freaking page?" You know, and so, you know, it was very much hit and miss. And they either loved the worm or they despised it. They either, you know, liked the light-hearted, joking approach, or they refused to take us seriously. And, you know, our website was also nothing to do with Metro, anything but, actually. And, you know, we had this cartoon theme going on, and it was all just a bit confusing. And I knew that, you know, trying to promote a product that was as clean and as refined as 3.0 via the current website under the name LazyTube, it wasn't going to do it justice. So what followed was going to be a complete pain in the bum, but I decided to make some drastic changes. I completely redesigned our company so that it fell in line with the Metro Design language, and, you know, we were stuck with our company name, and I wasn't about to change it, but I decided that I would take no risks, and I would separate our company branding from the application experiences themselves. And so what I mean by this is every single app from now on would get its own website, it'd get its own social media outlets, it would get its own, and it would fall under its own unique, unified look. So rather than us trying to shove our branding onto people, we would let people fall in love with our app and then let them seek out who was behind it. So, this was quite a different strategy, quite a different marketing strategy for us. And so what I did is I canned all the anything related to cartoons. I stripped back the company logo branding, and the new logo ended up becoming a tile, a worm passing through a tile, which also spelled out the words LWA, which is an acronym for Lazy Worm Apps. And early iterations we showed to our customers, we were still receiving mixed feedback. And now it was the flip side. We had a lot of people that liked it, and a lot of people that were saying we completely lost the personality that they'd grown to love. And so there was actually one comment that someone made a suggestion that it looked like a tapeworm. And so I thought, well, this is not the kind of image that we want to be giving across. And so I thought, okay, if we're going to be a worm, what kind of worm should we be? And, it hit me, gummy worms, right? So you can't go wrong with gummy worms. And that's why I started playing around with much more brighter colors, and it really helped me tone down the seriousness of our branding. The concept of the gummy worm also helped me with the website copy, and the idea of us building sweet apps would now become our motto. So we actually continued taking a light-hearted approach, but rather than trying to do this visually with cartoons, we did it with color, and we did it with wording on our website. And so, this helped us retain our personality and the image that we're trying to portray, but it still fell in line with the Metro design language. LazyTube was rebranded to MetroTube, and now it sported a clean, simple logo. The website and social media images, it followed suit, and we had this complete unified experience. And now all the pieces of the puzzle were complete, and we launched MetroTube in late 2011, and it was an overnight success. And I should probably be a little bit more humble, but we smashed it out of the park. It rocked, and it ended up making quite a splash. Ever since the announcement of Consumer Preview, the opportunities of Windows 8 would really start to hit home with me. And now that we'd achieved a decent amount of exposure on Windows Phone, it was time to prepare for the launch of Windows 8. And getting our app approved wasn't easy. The marketplace was strictly invite only, and Microsoft had a set of hurdles in place to ensure that any accepted app would be of a showcase standard. So they had this thing called the App Excellence Review, and I won't go too much into details, but I think that the general process is hugely beneficial to anybody who wants to deliver a quality Windows 8 experience. So the first thing we had to do was we had to outline our UX goals. We had to outline our primary use case scenarios, who are we catering for, and essentially explain how our app would deliver an exceptional experience, what was going to make us stand out, and what were we going to do very, very well. Next was the navigation flow. They wanted a complete overview of every single screen and how users would navigate throughout those screens. So initially I'd tackled this with paper prototypes, a big old pinboard and a bunch of string, and it helped me really flesh out how I was going to tackle this problem. You'll notice here that also it's split up into the hub and then sections and then details. That's the general outline of what you'd base your hierarchy around. I couldn't submit that to Microsoft, so I had to eventually set up this document, which was a very extremely detailed document outlining exactly what the flow was like. And for the final stages of the review, we had to outline every single screen and how it would adapt to the different Windows 8 views. And so, how would it look like in the snap view? How would it look like in the portrait view, landscape view? What would it look like in a big screen, small screen? What is it going to look like when you semantically zoom? And all these kind of things. And so they wanted us to flesh out exactly how each of these screens would adapt. And on the right there you can see parts of that document that was submitted. And finally we had to outline all of our start tiles and how they would behave in the live tile state. And we had to outline what contracts that we were going to support. So basically, before we'd written a single line of code, Microsoft had us flesh out this entire app experience. And this process, it was tedious, it was time consuming, and the complete polar opposite of how we actually got started on Windows Phone. But it meant that we were able to deliver a much more refined product within a significantly shorter time frame. And if you remember, MetroTube took us something like a year and a half to get to that point, whereas Tweetro, we did it in 3 months. And I think the design, Tweetro is not as polished as MetroTube, but the design is almost on par. And having thought through the process so heavily at the start really helped us do this, and also helps cut down on development time. So Tweetro has been out in the marketplace for a few months now, and the feedback that we've received has been quite eye-opening. Unlike any other project I've worked on before, Windows 8 apps are essentially hybrid apps. They need to be able to work under several different varying use cases. And when I designed Tweetro, I had one thing in mind, and that was purely the touch experience. I was told that if I designed for touch, that I'd get mouse and keyboard for free. And this is true for the most part, but I hadn't really properly considered what the desktop experience would be like. And what quickly started to hit home was the fact that almost everybody, when we launched, almost everybody was using our app on the desktop via big monitors. And so, I was so blinded by my techie mentality, and I forgot that I was the only one, or one of the very few people in the world who was using it via, a proper Windows 8 tablet. And I think, even with the official launch and the introduction of a lot of these new touch devices that are going to be coming, a lot of people, or the majority of people, are going to be upgrading their existing devices, and so ignoring the desktop experience isn't something that we can do. So this has pretty much been our focus now, and we're in the process of optimizing the desktop experience. And so here's a few things that we've learned so far. You absolutely must have a killer snap view. Now, some of your desktop users, they like the idea of multitasking, and the better they'll snap it onto the side of their screen and they'll do their work. And so the better that your snapped experience is, the more engaging it is, the more functional it is, the more likely they're going to keep it open. And so it's not just about changing the layout to adapt to the snap view. You actually got to think purely about how are they going to interact. How is that experience going to be? How is it going to work in that snap view? Probably one of the most commonly requested features being keyboard shortcuts. I mean, we completely ignored this when we launched, and it's something very simple and easy to do that makes a big difference to the experience. A little more on the advanced user side, but it also pays to try and navigate your app. Put the mouse aside and try and navigate your app via keyboard. Ours doesn't even come close. It doesn't even work at all. But this is something that we really need to fix, because there will be people, as you see Jeff Atwood before. He wants to just tweet just via the keyboard, and it's something that needs to be considered. The Windows 8 no compromise experience is a very exciting concept, but getting it right with the apps is extremely difficult. There's so many different factors that you need to consider, and it's something that we're still trying to get our heads around today. The take-home message is, just be aware that your apps are going to be used in so many different use cases on so many different devices, and it's something that really needs to be contemplated. So that's pretty much been our journey to date. I'm genuinely excited about the future. I believe that we're witnessing a very interesting time in our industry. And for those who haven't started building apps, Windows 8 and Windows Phone 8 are just around the corner. So there really couldn't be a better time to get started. There's now a wealth of resources available. It really only takes a matter of weeks to get up to speed, and as opposed to trying to learn the ropes like we did over the duration of a year and a half. As we saw in yesterday's keynote, I think it's worth noting that we actually have a lot of awesome stuff coming out of New Zealand, and it would be nice to see more and more Kiwis showing the world what we're capable of. On a final note, if you are working on an app or thinking about getting started and want to have a chat, and I'm more than happy, and we're more than happy to show our support. So flick me an email at lazywebmaps.com, or tweet me, or come and say hi at TechEd, and thank you very much, and thanks for coming to our session. I know there's a lot of sessions that are on, and we really appreciate that you guys chose to come and see, and I hope you took something away today and I wasn't too boring.